I'm back with another video. This time I want to talk about something that most of you guys probably know about me. I am the biggest book nerd ever. I love books, I love reading, I will read through anything pretty much. I just can't get enough. Although I read a lot, there's only some books that have greatly impacted my life. I thought that I would share 7 of the books that have influenced me the most in my life. Let's get started. So as you know, I'm an English and French major, and if you didn't know that, surprise! I was an English and French major. Through my studies, I read a lot of books. So many books. And some of them I really hated. Some of them I really love. However, most of the books that impacted me the most, whether it be as a child, a young adult, or now an adult, or trying to be an adult, have been the ones that I read on my own time. Alright, let's take it back to when I was a child. The first book that I really remember impacting me the most was Someone Like You by Sarah Dessen. Now, although this is kind of like one of those young adult romancy type books, it taught me so much, and I'm not gonna spoil the book. However, I can tell you what I learned. From that book, I actually learned a lot about dating and relationships and what not to fall into. It taught me a lot about peer pressure and how to withstand peer pressure. It taught me a lot about how people fall into peer pressure and become someone that they don't even recognize. Also, it taught me a lot about how falling in love or thinking you're in love with someone can greatly impact how you fall into certain habits, say drugs, alcohol, losing all your friends because you isolate yourself just to be with that one person. It taught me so much about growing up. I mean, I think we've all been in a relationship where we maybe weren't the best boyfriend or girlfriend. So I think that anyone who reads this can take something away from it. Kind of following the trend, I really liked romance books. I really liked romance books growing up. I always loved the princess fairy tale. I loved everything about that. And that's what hooked me on a series by Meg Cabot. And no, it wasn't the Princess Diaries. I'm talking about the Queen of Babble, which is like the Princess Diaries, but the more adult-like version of it. This book spoke to me on so many levels. Finally, there was a girl who was just like me, who talked too much, too loudly, was super into fashion. I was hooked. And this book was actually super educational as well because it talked a lot about adult things that you wouldn't think about as a kid. So it taught me about romances falling in and out of love, what happens when you've literally had that person in your life for so long and you realize you don't even love them anymore. And it talked about serious topics too, like career advice. It talked about pursuing your dreams. And it was the first book I actually found where the heroine actually had a career. She made something of herself. And throughout the whole series, you got to see this one character grow so much. And it wasn't like Twilight or something like that, where you have a heroine that's kind of like weak and has the man that does everything for her. This girl bulldozed through everything, and I loved every second of it. The next book was Weed Flower. Alright, so Weed Flower is written by a lady named Cynthia, and I'm gonna butcher the last name, so please bear with me. Kodahata? I'm sorry, I'm terrible at pronouncing names sometimes. Anyways, the story is super exhilarating and it taught me so much about American history that you weren't really getting in classes. In case you didn't know, America had concentration camps. Did you know that? Because I didn't at the time. And so the book really focuses on a perspective of a child, a young girl who her whole life has grown up in America, has been born in America, never had an issue, and then once Pearl Harbor happens, her whole life is thrown out and she suddenly becomes a prisoner. And I know we've all heard about the Holocaust, but no one ever thinks about it being on our own soil in California, in Arizona. So this book really influenced how I view discrimination in America, and it also influenced me a lot to rethink everything I thought I knew about American history, because a lot of times the books are just written by the people who won in history, so you never hear about some of the atrocities that we did. Another book that I read, and shamefully I was one of the few people who didn't read this book in high school. It was never a requirement, and I actually ended up reading it in a teens and youth rebellion class in college. That's actually a thing. It was the best class I've ever taken in my life. The book I'm talking about, which most people probably are already familiar with, is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. This book had a cult following, and for a good reason. This book influenced so much about how I perceive depression and isolation, and it actually talks really interestingly about like how you can be alone even though you're surrounded by people. You can feel so lonely even though you have a whole support system. And most people never talk about that in books. They talk about, oh, I'm so lonely because I can't go outside, or I can't do. He goes outside, he's in school, he's he's kind of popular. But the thing is, like, this is a normal everyday kid like you and me, and he's just struggling so much with connecting with people. And you have all these people that, as he calls them, phony. They're just putting on a persona to act cool or to be cool, and he's tired of it. And I think it connects a lot with people that are teenagers or young adults that feel like they're being isolated for being different. I think it's a really good book to inspire you to think outside the box and maybe even connect with someone. The next book was actually one I read in high school, and it was Anthem by Ayn Rand. Now, if you're not familiar with Ayn Rand, she was a very, very popular and influential writer. And I think, if I'm quoting right, this book was actually banned along with Catcher in the Rye at one point. So, if you want to go through the banned book list, I've got 2 of them for you. Anthem focuses on more of a dystopian, futuristic type of effect, and I found it really, really influential because you never think of how easy it could be for someone to take over the world, and most people wouldn't even fight back. And I found it really interesting how even though they've been in this world for so long, they find one little thing or one person that's different and it changes everything. And so I think it's really important to read books like this just to remind us what we could become or what could happen. Another book that I read in class. Now, I've read the abridged and the unabridged version, and the book I'm talking about is actually a French book by Alexander Dumas, and it is The Comte de Monte Cristo, or The Count of Monte Cristo. I'm so used to the French version, so I'm just gonna say Le Comte de Monte Cristo. Alexander Dumas was one of those authors that got paid by the word. So he's kind of like Dickens in a way where he writes a lot. And Comte de Monte Cristo is no different. It's huge. I think there's like 7 volumes, 12 volumes. It's broken up kind of like Les Miserables. This book is so dense. Dense as in you really have to remember everything about the book or else you'll miss a whole bunch. It was one of the first books that actually really challenged how I view revenge, because revenge actually doesn't help you at all. And I think that's what the book mainly divulges in, is looking at how a man finally gets all of these revenges and how it doesn't actually turn out how he wants it, even though the planning and everything went as planned. Nothing happened as he wanted it. He never got that happiness he was looking for. It's never gonna make you happy finishing the revenge or doing something vengeful. It never actually makes you feel great in the end. The last book I'm going to talk about is one of the more recent books I've read, and the book is called Feed. It's by Matthew Tobin Anderson. The book follows kind of a dystopian novel similar to Anthem in a way, where you're in a place where humans have evolved to a point where it's oppression. But in this society, you see someone who doesn't think differently. He is in the zone with everyone else, and it was really interesting because when you look at it, it starts to show the social classes of America today, and it shows like where we're going with consumerism and how detrimental some technology can be to the world. And I think it's a really good read for anyone that you think may have a technology addiction, or maybe doesn't think that there's a problem with too much technology, or they trust way too much, because it makes you trust no one. Those are my top books that influenced me the most, that I think every person should read. I'm sure there's a ton more that I could list, but I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. That's all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoy these recommendations, and read on!